Good evening, everyone. Mr. Evans here again. This is Chapter 2 of The Trouble with Terry by Joan Lenau. Chapter 2 is called Down by the River. Terry reached back and peeled the shirt from her skin for about the 500th time. If only it wasn't so bloody hot, she said. She'd been reading about the Bastables lately and was feeling very English. Oh, I say, rather, Tommy replied instantly. It was too hot to point out to him how beastly he was. Terry looked at the others squatting on the curb beside her and wondered if they could possibly be as hot as she was. They were all there. Terry, Tommy, Mike, Danny, and Greg. Danny and Greg were 11 and in the same grade as Tommy, even though he was 12. Tommy had been born the wrong time of year to be in the grade ahead with Mike. Since lunch, they'd been sitting and waiting until one of them thought of something to do, something they hadn't already tired of in the week since vacation started. Suddenly, Mike burst out, "Dooby-dooby-dooby-dooby-doo." It sounded more like the tired downhill side of piano scales than a song. "We could go to your house, Greg," Danny said. It wasn't nice to invite yourself somewhere. But even so, Terry was glad Danny had said it. Greg's house would be cooler. Greg was the only one in the gang who didn't live in the apartment building. He lived on the same street on the other side of the woods, and they often played there. His mother was home during the day, and sometimes she made lemonade for them. "Can't," Greg said. "My ma's got a sinus headache, and she doesn't want me around more than necessary." Just then, Soupy started to cry again. He was trying to skate on some rusty skates and kept falling down. Every time he fell, he burst into tears. Terry could tell from the way he cried that the tears were from habit, not from hurt. "There goes Crybaby again," Mike said. "Shut up, stupid," Danny told his little brother without even bothering to turn around. Terry couldn't blame Mike and Danny too much for being impatient with Soupy. It seemed that he was always crying about something. In fact, that was why he was called Soupy when his real name was Kevin. Well, maybe she could do something about it. Slowly and carefully, Terry stood up. Her legs were all pins and needles from sitting in one position so long. She went over to Soupy and yanked him to his feet. Immediately, he stopped crying and smiled at her. "Listen, Soup, I want to tell you something," Terry said. "I used to be a crybaby myself." "I'm not a crybaby," Soupy said. "Yes, you are," Terry said, "but I'm going to help you. Stop. Look, you're going to be in first grade this year, and—" "Going to be rich then," Soupy shouted, and got himself so excited that he nearly fell over again, and Terry had to grab him. He and Danny and Mike were always talking about all the things they were going to do when Soupy was in school all day and their father got a regular job. Now their father visited factories, taking Soupy with him, and wrote articles for magazines about the machines and things. In between times, he typed envelopes or whatever work he could get. But he had already been offered his old job back as a newspaper reporter for next fall. "I know," Terry said, "but that's not what I mean. When I was in the first grade, I still cried all the time, and you know what happened? In second grade, I saw a note on the teacher's desk, a note the first grade teacher had written about everybody. And after my name, it said, 'Cries easily.' It was awful, Soupy, all written down like that, and you don't want that to happen to you, do you?" Before Soupy had a chance to say he didn't care, Terry went on. "I'll tell you what to do. When you fall, instead of crying, just say to yourself, 'So I fell, so what?' And then get up and don't think about it anymore." "Okay," Soupy said. "Well, try it," Terry said. "Go ahead and fall." "Now?" Soupy asked. "Sure," said Terry. Soupy fell down so hard that Terry flinched. He didn't make a sound, just sat there blinking at her. "See," Terry said. "What did I tell you? It works." Soupy went on sitting and staring. What did you say I should say to myself? He asked. Oh, Soupy, you're hopeless, Terry sighed. But then she remembered that after all, he hadn't cried. I tell you what, she told him. If you'll stop crying all the time, I'll take you to the library and you can take out a book on my card. Just one, though, because I can only take out 4 at a time. Soupy had been begging her to take him to the library for a long time. Several times she had taken out a book to read to him, even though it was embarrassing. She hoped the librarian knew those books weren't for herself. A woman walking by smiled at Soupy, and he gave her an angelic smile in return. Then he got to his feet and wobbled after her. Soupy, you come back here, Terry yelled. She had cured him of asking the women who went by if they were his mother, but he still followed them sometimes. His own mother had spent all the money they had, and more besides, and then just went away one day when Soupy was a baby. She left a lot of bills, and a note saying she was sorry, but probably they could get along better without her. Soupy had been told his mother was sick and went away to get well. She must have been sick, Terry thought, to do a thing like that. Terry's father had died so long ago that all she remembered about him was his mustache. But which was worse, she wondered, to have a parent die or go away and leave you? She had to run and drag Soupy back. And then, to show him he'd been bad, she went to the curb and sat down, just in time to hear Mike say, "We could go right up to the pool and go swimming." Terry wanted to cry out no, but she held it back. If they went swimming, that meant she couldn't go along. Tommy would go with Greg on Greg's bike, and Danny and Mike on their bike. If Terry walked, by the time she got there, they'd be starting for home. And they wouldn't care, not one of them. Well, maybe Tommy would a little, but not enough to stop him from going. None of the boys complained about her being in the gang, but they didn't miss her when she wasn't there, she was sure. When they played baseball, Tommy was the only one who remembered when it was her turn at bat. Tommy said now, "I wish we'd thought of that earlier. If we started out now, I wouldn't get back in time for my route." "Yeah," Danny said, "and all those hills. It's my turn to pedal, and I don't think I could make those hills today." "Hey, I know what," Tommy said. "Let's go down by the river. That should be cool." That seemed like a good idea to all of them, and they started out right away. There was a furious sound of clumping skates behind them. Danny yelled, "You stay home, Soupy. You can't come where we're going." "Go on back, Soupy," Mike said when Soupy kept coming. "Do as I say or I'll give you a swat." Soupy stopped, but he was looking at Terry as though she were a criminal. She felt sorry for him and ran back. "We won't be gone long," she said. "I wish you could come too, but you'd fall if you tried to climb down the bank. We don't want you to get hurt, Soupy." Soupy turned away and wouldn't answer. Terry gave up and ran to catch up with the others. At least he hadn't cried. Maybe she had taught him something. The Mississippi River was 6 blocks away. They went to their special place, marked by a tall, broad-limbed tree. By the tree was a path leading to a rock ledge, hanging out high and scary out over the river. Beside the ledge, it was possible to go down all the way to the river itself. Even though the bank was steep, the boys raced down. Terry thumped down on the seat of her jeans. It was clumsy, but safe. When she got to the bottom, the boys were already roaming the shore of the inlet looking for treasure. Once they had found a rubber doll, so faded and flattened that even Terry didn't want it. Today they didn't find anything. Terry breathed in the river smell, old and stale, yet fresh and exciting at the same time. "Hey, look at the bottom part of the bridge," Mike yelled. "I never noticed before. It must go all the way across the river like that." They all stared at it. The under part of the bridge looked like huge white waves of concrete. It started on the shore they were on and continued uphill and down all the way across as far as they could see. Mike ran to the bridge and up to the top of the first wave. "Last one across is a rickety rocket," he yelled, as he turned and disappeared on the other side of the wave. In a flash, the other boys were on the bridge and running. Terry followed more slowly, half crawling up the incline. She didn't like this at all. The bridge was wide enough, but the hills were steep, and except at the top of each hill, there was nothing at the sides, just the edge and then the river down below. What would happen, Terry worried, if they were caught on this part of the bridge? But it wasn't likely that anyone would see them unless a barge came by. Anyhow, she didn't want to be left by herself, so she kept on doggedly. On the top of the first crest, Terry slouched over to keep from hitting the top part of the bridge and looked ahead. She could see Greg on the next crest and Tommy halfway up it, with Mike on the one beyond them. Mike was sitting down resting. She could see him panting. Danny was out of sight. Terry slid cautiously down her hill, torn between going on and going back. Just as she reached the bottom, she heard a chortling noise behind her. There was Soupy, standing at the top of the rise, still on his roller skates. He had followed them somehow without making enough noise for them to hear. He must have crawled up the concrete, and there he was, eyes closed, laughing at the trick he'd played. All of a sudden, his skates began to take him downhill, toward the edge of the bridge. At first, Terry was so terrified she couldn't move. She heard herself screaming, "Soupy!" and that woke her up. Without thinking, she dashed up the hill and threw herself at Soupy, knocking him safely aside. But she was right at the edge, and her momentum carried her on. She felt her legs go over the side, and then she was digging into the concrete with her elbows and her hands. She could hear Tommy yelling, "Hold on, Terry, we're coming, hold on." His voice sounded far away. "Please, God, make them hurry," Terry prayed. "I can't hold on much longer." Her shoulders were burning with pain. "You pushed me down," an aggrieved voice said in her ear. And then in alarm, "You won't fall down, Terry, will you?" Two small hands pulled at her hair and the back of her shirt. Soupy was crying now in earnest. With the last of her breath, Terry managed to say clearly, "You can't pull me up, Soupy. Go away from the edge. I mean it." Her arms gave way. But she was going up instead of down. Strong hands were pulling her from every direction, wherever they could get hold. Slowly she was dragged up onto the bridge. Nobody said anything for a while. They were all too winded and dazed. Terry lay still, gazing at the sky. It was a beautiful sky, and the soft clouds fluttering across it were beautiful too. Finally, she sat up and looked around her. Soupy smiled and started up to come over to her. Danny pulled him down. "You stay put, meathead," he said. "Of all the idiotic things to do, following us down here." "Everybody pushes me," Soupy howled. "Terry promised she'd take me to the library, and she didn't. She went away, and she promised." Terry remembered she had said she'd take him to the library if he didn't cry all the time. "But I didn't mean right away, Soupy," she cried. That must have been why he was so angry when she left him, and why he had come after her to the river. Mike shook his finger in Soupy's face and said, "That's enough out of you. You just ought to be glad you're here. If Terry hadn't saved your life, you wouldn't be. If she'd got drowned in the river, it would have been your fault because you didn't mind when we told you to stay home. You remember that the next time we tell you to do something. You understand?" Soupy nodded, his eyes wide with wonder. But he doesn't understand at all, Terry thought. He's too little. "Must be about time for me to pick up my papers," Tommy said after a while. "You all right, Terry?" "Sure," Terry said, jumping to her feet. Her legs collapsed, and she fell down again. Laughing shakily, Terry got up more slowly, with Tommy and Greg's help. They held her until her legs were firm. "Boy, are you a mess," Tommy said. Terry was surprised to find that her arms and knees were torn and bloody. Now that she noticed them, they began to sting. Her shoulders still ached. As soon as they were home, Terry went to get cleaned up. After asking her again if she was all right, Tommy went to pick up his papers. Terry washed her arms and legs and got into jeans and a long-sleeved blouse. It was a good thing she'd worn shorts, she thought, because she might have torn her jeans and then she really would have caught it. But it was going to be pretty uncomfortable wearing long sleeves in this hot weather. She wondered if her mother would notice. None of the parents knew they played by the river. Terry suspected her mother would be angry if she found out. It would still be a while before her mother came home. Terry settled down with one of her library books. Right away, she liked Helen, the girl in the story. Helen was always doing wrong things, too. The book was Terry's favorite kind, both happy and sad, and she was completely absorbed in it when the silence was shattered by a voice saying, "What's the matter with you?" Her mother was standing over her. What? Terry stammered. "I've been talking to you for 5 minutes," her mother said impatiently. "You're pale. I hope you're not coming down with something." "I feel okay," Terry said. "Except for hurting all over," she added to herself. "I suppose you've been in all day reading," Mrs. Seth said. "I'll go out right after supper," Terry said earnestly. "After the dishes are done, you mean," her mother said, smiling a little, and she started toward the kitchen. There was a knock at the door, and she answered it. "Is Terry home?" Soupy's father asked. He and Soupy came in. "What's this all about your saving Kevin's life?" Mr. O'Halloran asked Terry. "That's all he'll tell me, that Mike said that you had saved his life, and I can't find Mike and Danny as usual. What happened?" "I didn't tell where," Soupy said proudly. "Mike told me not to." Terry wished she could shake him. "Well," she began, thinking desperately, "you see, it looked like Kevin was going to fall down, and so I stopped him," she finished brightly. "You pushed me down," Soupy said gently. "There's more to it than that," Terry's mother said. "I knew there was something as soon as I walked in the door. Now you tell me what happened, Terry, and you tell it right. I know you don't lie, but the way you walk around the truth sometimes, I'd think you'd get worn out." Terry blushed. She knew she'd have to give part of it away. "Well, Soupy and I were down by the river, and he almost fell in, so I just stopped him. Anybody would have," she said, not daring to look at anyone. At least she hadn't given away the others. "You took Soupy down to the river?" her mother said in horror. "Are you out of your mind?" "I followed her," Soupy said gaily, "and she didn't see me. Nobody seen me. I went real quiet." "Just what were you doing down by the river?" Mrs. Seth demanded. "And how long have you been going down there? You know I wouldn't want you playing there, Terry, didn't you? Was Tommy there too?" "Everybody was there," Soupy said. "They said I couldn't go, but I did." Soupy was chortling with joy again, just the way he was on the bridge. "Well, Terry and Tommy won't be going there anymore," their mother said. "Oh, now, Mrs. Seth." Soupy's father hesitated. He looked embarrassed. "I don't want to interfere, but you might consider geography, for instance." "Geography?" Mrs. Seth repeated. "Yes. All over the country, children have to learn about the location of the Mississippi River. And history. Why, DeSoto was buried in it, LaSalle died trying to get to the mouth of the river, and—" Mr. O'Halloran took a breath and stopped. He was always saying that he was going to write a book on Midwestern history if he ever got the time. "Sorry," he said. "Didn't mean to make a speech." Terry's mother smiled. "Don't be sorry," she said. "I'm glad you spoke up. Anyway, just the exercise of climbing up and down the riverbank should be good for a boy." For a boy. Terry's sudden hope faded away. "I want to thank you, Terry, for saving Kevin's life," Mr. O'Halloran said, his face reddening. Thanking people didn't come easy to him. "And for all that you've done for him all these years. I don't know what we'd do without you." His tone changed abruptly as he said, "Come on home, Kevin. You have a spanking coming for being disobedient. You're too young to go down to the river, but you're old enough to mind." "Oh, please don't spank him," Terry pleaded. Mike and Danny bragged about how hard their father hit them, and Terry couldn't bear the thought of it happening to Soupy. She told his father about the promise Soupy thought she'd broken. "Well, I guess at Kevin's age you don't think beyond right this minute. He does get things awfully mixed up sometimes. But I have to teach him to obey, Terry. I tell you what, though, you can come along and watch, and if you think I'm spanking him too hard, just say so and I'll stop." Mr. O'Halloran was grinning about something. Terry couldn't see anything funny. Terry's mother said she could go if she came right back. "I want to talk to you," she said ominously. Soupy's father set out 2 chairs a little apart. Terry thought maybe one was for her, but he didn't say anything about it, so she stood and watched. Mr. O'Halloran brought out a wicked-looking belt from the closet. "Okay, Kevin," he said. Soupy sprawled out on his father's lap. Still grinning, Soupy's father gave Soupy a little pat on his rear. At the same time, he brought the belt down with a hard thwack on the other chair. "Ow!" Soupy yelled. Thwack. "Ow!" Thwack. "Ow!" "Think you can do what you're told now?" his father asked sternly. "Yes," Soupy gasped. He stood up. "I didn't cry," he announced. "I'm too big to cry all the time." "That's wonderful, Soupy," Terry told him, trying hard to keep a straight face. "Anyhow, it didn't hurt too much," he said. Said his father. "Maybe next time it'll hurt a little more." Terry went smiling down the hall. Her smile faded quickly when she reached her apartment. "Now you can tell me exactly what happened at the river," her mother said sternly. "All of it. You weren't going to say anything at all about it, were you?" Terry shook her head. "After you finish, you're going to promise me you won't go there anymore. It may be all right for Tommy, but it's about time you started acting like a girl instead of a roughneck." "It isn't fair," Terry said furiously. "You let Tommy do anything he wants just because he's a boy. Well, all right then, I won't be a girl anymore. I'll cut my hair off and I'll run away and join the army," she finished, wildly flailing her arms. Terry's mother, her voice going higher with each word, was saying, "Now, Teresa, Seth, you calm down," when Tommy rushed in. "Hey, Terry, I got you a paper route," he shouted breathlessly. "Oh boy, oh boy, oh boy," Terry yelled. "It's just for a week," Tommy went on excitedly, "but it should give you a little money towards a bicycle." He stopped when his mother collapsed on the sofa, saying, "That's the last straw." "What's wrong with a bicycle?" Tommy asked, looking from his mother to Terry. "It isn't the bicycle," Terry said grimly. "She's going to make me promise not to go down to the river anymore, and I bet you anything she's going to say I can't have the paper route, and it isn't fair." Before their mother could say anything, Tommy said, "But gee, Mom, if you make her promise not to go down to the river, that's like punishing her for saving Soupy's life. Why, she almost died." "She what?" "Maybe you'd better tell me what happened, Tommy. Maybe I can get some sense out of you," his mother said. So Tommy told all about it. Terry was amazed. He made her seem like a real heroine. She listened fascinated. Every little while her mother whispered, "Good heavens." "So then," Tommy finished, "just as she was slipping off, we got to her and pulled her up. For a minute I thought we wouldn't be able to. She didn't have any strength left and couldn't help, and Soupy kept getting in the way. And there she was, all bloody and looking like she was going to faint or something. Good heavens, Mrs. Seth said weakly. And it wasn't her fault we went on the bridge. She just came after, real slow and careful. She's always much more careful than the rest of us, Tommy pointed out. Well, it's no wonder you're all worked up, Terry. I think you'd better go right to bed, but first let's take a look at your scars. As Terry opened her mouth to object, her mother added, I'm not sending you to bed to punish you, but you've had too much excitement. You can read, and I'll give you your supper in bed. Anyhow, you'll get out of drying the dishes, Tommy whispered, and I bet she forgets all about making you promise about the river. Mrs. Seth didn't say anything definite about whether they could or couldn't play by the river, but she did give them a hint of what would happen again if they did something like climbing on a bridge again. Just before she fell asleep, Terry remembered that her mother hadn't said if she could have the paper out. She wanted to ask her, but she was so tired. That is the end of our chapter for the evening. I will see you again tomorrow night for chapter 3.